All right, good afternoon, comrades. Thank you for coming back after lunch. Now, our topic is greenwashing is not the solution to climate crisis. So, viewing crisis as opportunities to increase profits is a consistent feature of capitalism. In addressing the threat of climate change, elites opt to leave it to the market and technology, or they simply delay action, adopting a callous attitude of after me the flood, or originally après moi le déluge in French. So we have wonderful speakers today, but two of them can't make it, so we're going to see them online. But the question is, why are we discussing this topic? It's a burning topic, very important, very crucial. As we can see now, we are, as leftist progressive movements, and also people at large and globally are at the crossroad, not only to choose side whether to be with the West or the East, so-called race, but also we are at the crossroad of dilemma in choosing either planet politics or rice pot politics, or we don't call it bread and butter, we rather call it rice pot, nasi. And we have wonderful speakers here from country as famous for bicycles and reclamation. We also have a speaker from a nation that is as big as United States of America, but with all sorts of transportation modes, including a favorite of mine, tram. And also we have a country that's the politicians are criticizing the electric vehicles, also called Ride the Lightning. Okay, without further ado, we can move to the first speaker. Is the first speaker ready? Yeah. So I would like to introduce the first speaker, Comrade Sam Wainwright from Australia. Comrade Sam Wainwright is a national co-convener of Socialist Alliance living in Bulu, of Perth, Western Australia. He was formerly elected councillor in Fremantle from 2009 to 2021. He has been active in campaigns for refugee rights and for human rights in Sri Lanka. He is currently active in the climate movement and unionist for Palestine. Okay, comment sent online now. Okay, all right. So rules of the house for speakers: each speaker will be given 20 minutes to present, and I will remind if time is running out, we need 5 minutes more to wrap up your presentation, and then we'll open for question and answer to the floor. Okay. And then second speaker after Sam will have Arnold Hofstra. I hope I addressed the name correctly. Arnold Hofstra is the General Secretary of the Socialist Party since 2019. Before that, he was the lead candidate for the SP during the elections for the European Parliament and an alderman in the city of London for 8 years. That's Comrade Arnold Hofstra. Also will be presenting online. Can make it here today. All right. Okay. Sam is here. Welcome, Comrade. Been a while. Comrade, can you hear me?
Oh yes, I can. Okay, I'll start then. You tell me if I'm doing the wrong thing there. Well, comrades, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's really great to be at your conference. In fact, it's 10 years.
Sam,
it's 10,
hang on.
Yes.
We can't hear you.
All right. Let's see if this is better.
Is that better? Can you hear me, comrades? Comrades, can you hear me?
Comrade Sam, can we have like a minute to work on to troubleshoot?
No problem. I'll be standing by. Okay, I'll start. Okay, comrades, thanks very much for the opportunity. I really do appreciate it. And as I tried to say at the outset, 10 years ago, I attended the Socialism conference there in Kuala Lumpur on behalf of Socialist Alliance. So it's fantastic to be at your conference again, even if only over Zoom. I wish I was there in person. That's fantastic. Okay, so I'll tackle this topic from an Australian perspective, obviously. I'll be making some general comments, but looking at very much at how this question of greenwashing manifests itself in the context of Australian politics. I hope it can be fairly concise. I won't be boring you with lots of slides. My party gave me this role on Thursday, but since then we have been frantically busy with our Palestine solidarity work. And in fact, our comrades here in Perth, or Bulu, spent most of last night participating in a community picket to stop the work on the Zim shipping line, which is an Israeli shipping line. We stopped access to that ship for 24 hours. And then this afternoon, we at 3 o'clock my time, so I'll have to duck out a bit early. We have another big mass protest for Palestine. So it's been very, very busy on that front. Okay, so to the substance of our question on greenwashing. Now, I'm going to look at this topic via four main ways. The first is I want to touch on the myth of green capitalism, the notion that somehow a green capitalism can be created. Second, I want to turn my attention to the political phenomenon that I call climate change fakers. Thirdly, and this is very pertinent to Australia, is the notion that gas is some sort of transition fuel in the journey to a green future. And fourthly and finally, I want to look at the question of war spending and explain to you why that preparations for war are utterly incompatible with the desire, the quest to save life on Earth as we know it. Okay, so first to the myth of green capitalism. I don't think I'll be saying anything new to people here that fundamentally capitalism cannot solve the ecological crisis in general and climate change in particular. Now, let's recap some of the essential features of capitalism. Although production is socialized and links billions of people across the globe, ownership of the means of production, of course, is privatized and concentrated in the hands of a tiny minority of billionaires. And production is geared entirely to maximizing the profits of those that own the means of production. And there are two obvious reasons why capitalism can't go green. In the first instance, it presupposes endless growth on a finite planet. Now, in the complete abstract, you might be able to conceive of a capitalism that continues to grow, but only by growing the service sector without consuming any more resources. But in the real world, that is not what capitalism is doing. And so we have endless growth on a finite planet, and we're already running up hard against the limits of the Earth's life systems. Secondly, of course, is capitalism seeks to externalize the true cost of production, both onto society and to the environment, in order to maximize profits. And that externalizing of the cost of production is even more sharply felt in the global South, in the era of imperialism, an epoch of war and racism. The system as it is no longer just the imperialist form of capitalism, though it is still that. It is the imperialist form of capitalism in its degeneracy, actively undermining the capacity of human civilization to be sustained. Earlier phases of imperialism took the form of colonialism, then post-colonial neo-colonialism via new institutions with US military force hegemonic. Now it combines neo-colonialism with a new growing battle for resources, and the global South will bear the brunt of ecological destruction as a direct extension of neo-colonialism. And that means that our struggle against capitalism therefore has climate justice at its heart. It's impossible to conceive of the sort of transformation that we will need in human society to address runaway global warming and the various other ecological crises without fundamentally breaking the back of capitalism economically and politically. Well, the second aspect I want to look at is the question of climate change fakers. Because, of course, in Australia, as I'm sure is the case in Malaysia, we are led by politicians who want to imagine that capitalism can indeed go green. And I want to say to you that there is something just as dangerous as climate change deniers. They are the climate change fakers. In Australian politics, for some time now, even conceding that climate change represents the existential crisis that it does, even conceding that climate change real has actually been contested by sections of our ruling class who have sought to, even though they don't believe it themselves, have sought to fan climate change skepticism in order to delay action. We've essentially passed that tipping point in Australian politics now, but the climate change fakers are effectively the second line of defence for the fossil fuel capitalists who dominate Australian politics. In the case of our country, the Australian Labor government claims to have ended the climate wars, which have characterised our politics for the last 2 decades, with a climate plan known as the safeguard mechanism. But it's a plan that does not respect the science. Because it's not enough to acknowledge that climate change is real, that climate science is real. Your solutions to climate change have to be based on the science as well. And we have politicians that like to imagine that runaway global warming is a problem that can just be negotiated with or bargained with like any other political issue. But of course, we can't bargain with the laws of physics. We're like passengers on a bus careering down a hill towards the edge of a cliff. We either apply the brakes before we go over the cliff or we don't. I say it's a plan that does not respect the science, fundamentally because it's based on the utterly flawed notion, the unscientific notion, that net zero by 2050 is sufficient. Furthermore, the Australian government is actually approving new coal and gas projects all the time, and Australia's emissions are actually increasing. Even worse, it has refused to make public a report it commissioned on the impacts of the climate crisis in Australia. Now, this so-called safeguard mechanism is meant to enforce limited reductions to carbon emissions on around 215 heavily polluting facilities run by big multinational corporations like Santos, BHP, Anglo Coal, Woodside, Chevron, and Rio Tinto. These are the heavy hitters of Australian capitalism. And it relies on carbon offsets, or as they're called in Australia, Australian carbon credit units, and safeguard emission credits, rather than measures to actually cut emissions. And according to a professor at the Australian National University, offsets in Australia are fundamentally devoid of integrity in 70 to 80% of cases. And yet Australia's targets for reducing its contribution to global warming is entirely based on offsets. So growing real world emissions, but making up for them with so-called offsets. And I want to suggest to you that carbon offsets are a central part of capitalist greenwashing. Carbon offsets are flawed for the following reasons. Firstly, they take the focus off reducing actual emissions to allow business as usual. Of course, some of the offset programs are not bad by themselves, say, for instance, where they involve the planting of trees. But we need to both reforest, that is to say, plant trees, and reduce our real-world emissions. Secondly, the whole concept of carbon offsets is fundamentally scientifically unprovable. So let me give you an example. Take a corporation in Australia, in the global north, that pays a community in Sumatra not to cut down a forest that they would otherwise have cut down, and then claim that as carbon credits. You cannot prove that that forest would otherwise have been cut down. Thirdly, the trading of carbon credits has become a money-making scam, just riddled with flaws and corruption, and fundamentally, as I mentioned before, carbon credits that are devoid of integrity. Okay, on to the third aspect of greenwashing that is a feature of Australian politics. And this is a big feature of Australian politics for comrades in Malaysia who are not familiar. And that is the drumbeat to tell us that gas is the transition fuel, that we need natural gas in the transition to a sustainable future, that somehow we can't make the jump from fossil fuels directly into renewable energy, that we need gas. And emblematic of that is the Scarborough Gas Project, which is off the coast of Western Australia, where I live. What is it, this project, Scarborough Gas? It's a new gas field that is projected to contribute 1.7 billion tonnes of CO2 into the atmosphere over its lifetime. Thought of another way, this is equivalent to 20,000 flights around the world every single day for the next 25 years. And it's only recently been approved, and the main company driving this project is called Woodside, which is Australia's biggest oil and gas company, but also with the collaboration of BHP and other multinational oil and gas companies. And as part of this project, they're proposing a new gas processing hub that would also take fracked gas from the land. So it would take natural gas from the ocean and frack gas from the land and process that gas. Now, in addition to the climate change consequences, the emissions, the acidic emissions in the atmosphere from this gas project actually threaten the oldest petroglyphs in the world. The petroglyphs being rock carvings. So Australia has the oldest rock carvings in the world. They're 40,000 years. There's a huge collection of these rock carvings in exactly the place where this new gas processing hub is being constructed. And so the rock carvings themselves are being destroyed or relocated, but the acidification of the atmosphere arising from the processing of the gas is also causing these rock engravings to erode. Just to give you a bit of a sense of the size and the scale of the gas industry in Australia. Australia has recently overtaken Qatar as the world's biggest exporter of LNG. Unfortunately, unlike Qatar, which receives about $17 billion in revenue per year, Australian taxpayers only receive around $700 million a year in taxes and royalties. Notwithstanding the fact that these companies are now making record profits because of the war in Ukraine, and all of that is flowing to private investors. So 19.7 million tonnes of CO2 per year flow from this LNG production. That's if you take in both the burning of the LNG at the source, fugitive emissions, that is to say emissions that escape from the production process, and then the processing itself, because there's a lot of CO2 comes from the processing of CO2. So our politicians like to say, oh, gas only has a third of the emissions of coal. But if you take the fugitive emissions and the processing emissions, then the emissions of CO2 from gas are just as bad as coal. So the notion that gas is some sort of transition fuel that we need is unscientific nonsense, but it is political orthodoxy in this country. Just some of the other companies that are involved are BHP, BP, Chevron, Shell, Mitsui, Chevron, ExxonMobil, Osaka Gas, Tokyo Gas, and Chubu Electric Power, Japanese power companies. That's, I should say, 44 million tonnes of CO2 are produced by all industrial and stationary electricity production here in Western Australia as well. A little bit more about the political context for this particular gas greenwashing, or gaslighting, you might call it, we have in Australia. As I mentioned, the gas industry is absolutely supported by the Labor Party and the Liberal Party, so they're our duopoly of capitalist politics, both at the state and the federal level. In fact, the incoming federal Labor Resources Minister said it was a privilege to witness the approval of the Scarborough gas project. And the domination of politics by the gas industry here in Western Australia is particularly pervasive. The gas industry goes to great efforts to secure what is called social license. Here in Western Australia, nearly every single major sporting or cultural event is sponsored by the big mining companies, in particular the gas companies. So this company, Woodside, for instance, its name is all over the place. Children's sports programs, cultural programs, all that sort of thing. And yet it's a company that has no retail customers. And you can see how important buying this social license is for the gas industry in our country. I should add as well that here in Western Australia, our major daily newspaper, the West Australian, is integrated into the gas industry as well. And the owner of that newspaper has interest in the gas industry. Just to give you a sense of how much our politics is dominated by this gas greenwashing. about 3 years ago, the Environmental Protection Authority, so a state-based agency, proposed that the gas industry should purchase offsets for the CO2 that is produced as a consequence of their processing of gas. Now, notwithstanding my criticism that I raised before of offsets as a form of greenwashing, that the purchasing offsets for the CO2 that is produced as a consequence of their processing of the gas, so that's even before the gas is burnt, would only have cost those major companies 1.5% of their profits. Yet within a week, our state government had basically squashed the proposal and pulled the EPA into line. And in fact, our state government is casting around to do everything it can to approve new gas projects. And this comes at a time when Antonio Guterres, the Secretary of the United Nations, declared quite explicitly that new fossil projects are, and I quote, economic and moral madness. Well, on to my fourth and final contribution to this discussion about greenwashing, and that is the fact that we cannot simultaneously prepare for war and fight climate change, as our politicians would have you believe. So they claim that they're making substantive progress towards addressing the threat posed by global warming, while at the same time spending and preparing for a new Cold War. And that is most demonstrably expressed by Australia's participation in the AUKUS submarine deal. I'm sure people in Malaysia would have heard about that. That's at this stage, estimated a $368 billion commitment by the Australian government to buy nuclear submarines sourced from the United States and the United Kingdom. But it's not just about the nuclear submarines. It's about the Australian ruling class absolutely and unequivocally aligning with the US policy of blocking China's growth, both economic, political, and militarily. And it's expressed in the current politics around the awful carnage that's going on in Gaza at the moment. Our Prime Minister, for instance, cannot even bring himself to support a ceasefire in Gaza, an unlimited ceasefire in Gaza, let alone support UN resolutions on the question of Palestine or more profound justice for the Palestinians. Australia has put itself in a situation where it has to wait until Joe Biden gives the approval before it can actually endorse a ceasefire. Well, we know that the unequal economic system in which wealth is drained from poor to rich inevitably creates misery, social disruption, and ecological destruction, both within countries and between countries. It's a world order that is both violent and requires violence to be maintained. It is the very cause of the human tide of refugees washing around the planet today. By the middle of the century, it is estimated that there may be as many as 200 million climate refugees forced out of their homes and livelihoods, even though the majority of greenhouse gas emissions are produced by the wealthy industrialized countries. As you know, it will be people in poorer countries who are least responsible for climate change who will bear its brunt. It's sometimes said by climate activists here in Australia that our government doesn't take climate change seriously. Unfortunately, that's not quite true. Our government is actually well aware of the worst case scenarios, including extensive reports by military intelligence agencies on the social, economic, and political disruption that climate change will bring. It's reflected in their response to the attempt by desperate, vulnerable people to reach Australia's shores. People who are oftentimes the victims of Australia's own policies, but who are now cast by pro-capitalist politicians and our media as a threat, even in an invasion. And that's seen right across the global north. The putting up of barriers to migrants and refugees. In our country, the militarization of refugee policy, both in language, so what used to be called customs and quarantine is now called border protection. That's the actual name of the government agency. But not just in words, but in deed. So the use of the Navy to intercept boats with refugees, for instance. This is an indication of how our rulers are in fact preparing to respond to the impending flood of climate refugees. I often say to climate activists, actually, our government does have a plan for climate change, but it doesn't centre on trying to rein in warming or transitioning to an environmentally sustainable economic system or fairly sharing the burden of change. but treating it as a national security issue that is preparing for climate change with repression and war. And as I mentioned earlier, our government is not just telling us to prepare for war with China, but to expect it. Now, it is simply impossible to confront the existential threat posed by runaway global warming while also pouring billions of dollars into a new Cold War in the expectation that it may one day become a hot war. And this will become a defining issue of Australian politics. We actually see a fusion of the anti-military struggle and the climate struggle around this question. Because it's not just that when I say to you that we need to fight climate change, not war, that's not just a slogan, but a decisive choice for humanity. It's one or the other. And right now in Australia, our government is choosing war over serious climate action. And so we need to find ways around the world, but particularly in this country, of how to popularize that understanding. Well, look, just to finish up, there are some stepping stones, the sorts of stepping stones towards the transformation that Australia could implement immediately and that we must campaign on to make a reality include some of the following things. And I'm sure they're similar in Malaysia as well. They include, one is a ban on all new fossil fuel projects. This is in particularly, I think there are contexts where countries in the global south are still going to need to rely on new fossil fuel income. But it's totally unacceptable for a rich country like Australia or Canada, for that matter, to be implementing new fossil fuel projects. Secondly, is a transition to 100% renewable energy for stationary electricity production. That could be achieved within about 5 years. Thirdly, we need an urgent redirection of government spending to reduce emissions from transport and agriculture. And fourthly, a cancellation of debts owed to the rich countries by the poor. We then need a free transfer of technology from the rich countries to poor countries to enable them to industrialize and lift their people's standard of living without following the same ecologically destructive path which was taken by the rich countries. But we know for that to be achieved, we'll need to break the back of capitalism, even those modest measures, politically and economically, and build our eco-socialist movements for change. That's what we're committed to doing, just as I'm sure you are. Thank you for your time, comrades.
But thank you, comrades. Please stay tuned. We have 2 more speakers and questions from the floor. Okay, I'm going to mute this one. I'm talking to the audience here. All right, stay tuned. Thank you, comrade Sam.
Very far away, very far away, very far away, very far away. Becoming climate refugees and also to propose the future to counter this green capitalism is eco-socialism. All right. Speaking about war, we have a speaker which is based in a country that's closer to Ukraine and also Palestine. Is Comrade Arnold online? Oh, okay. So Comrade Arnold Hoekstra is the General Secretary of Socialist Party of the Netherlands since 2019. Before that, he was a lead candidate for the Socialist Party during the elections for the European Parliament and an alderman in the city of Leiden for 8 years. All right.
Check. Comrade Arnold, can you hear me?
Yes. Hi. Good afternoon, everyone.
Yeah, so you have 20 minutes. I will remind you when you are left with 5 minutes. 3, 2, 1, go.
Okay. Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Here in the Netherlands, it's still very early in the morning. It's a pity I cannot be there with you physically, especially because it's very cold here at this moment. It's below 0 degrees Celsius, so outside it's very cold. I guess a bit different than over there, but for climate reasons, I think, better than that we have an online meeting. Then I come over there only for this meeting. So thank you for inviting me. I hope to give you some more perspective from the European and especially the Dutch situation in this debate. Where I come from is Vlaardingen. It's near Rotterdam, and Rotterdam is the big harbor port here in this region of Western Europe, and there's a lot of industries around here. It serves as a crucial logistical hub for Western Europe, so mainly the Netherlands and Germany and all other countries that don't have any big sea ports to get all kinds of stuff from all over the world. And just, I guess, 1 or 2 kilometers from my house here is the biggest oil refinery from Shell of Europe, and they refine more than 400,000 barrels of crude oil into chemical products every day. And Shell is from origin a Dutch company that grew in the years with their core business of selling products made of oil. And when you see that they are one of the main causes of climate change, and the products they make and sell, the main reasons of climate change, then it's very strange that our government here, instead of taxing them and say you should pay high tax on products that are not very well for our environment, so that you get forced to invest in better alternatives, they don't pay any tax. Or almost no tax, and instead of that, they receive subsidies. They receive millions and hundreds of millions of subsidies for their activities, and they do that in a way of greenwashing. So they make all kinds of advertisements here all around the region that they say, we invest in bio-based oils, we invest in better alternatives, but they don't if you do the research. The same is with Unilever, which is also here based in my city here in R&D, but also in production. The Unilever started here with their soap factory almost 100 years ago, but is now a multinational working and selling all around the globe their products. And it's like the same with Shell. They don't pay hardly any tax. They receive a subsidy, and they are the main cause of the deforestation of the main palm oil production, to get all the palm oil from Asia, South America, here to Europe to make all kinds of products with huge environmental issues. And it's the same. They have all kinds of nice pictures on their websites and on their products and on television, how great they are working on the environment. Their slogan is making sustainable living commonplace, which they don't. They are ruining the environment, and they receive a subsidy for that. And they are all companies owned by shareholders. And we all understand as socialists that shareholders don't buy their shares for making this world a better place for all of us. They buy only these shares to make a profit. To make a profit not by working, but by letting others work, by the people in the factories, the consumers who pay an unfair price for the products, and to make use taxpayers' money by not paying tax themselves and receive subsidies, but especially by exploiting our climate and our environment. And if they don't make enough profit with these shares, in either case, whether it's because they receive low dividends or the value of the shares doesn't grow sufficiently, they will sell their shares. So you and I understand what the management of these multinationals will do. They make sure their shareholders stay happy. Otherwise, they get kicked out of by the shareholders meeting. And you cannot make a high profit with really paying a fair tax and paying fair salaries for the employees and invest in the environment in a way that is really necessary. So what we need, and I agree with Comrade Wainwright, is we need another economical system. We need to beat capitalism because as we all know, there is no ethical consumption possible under capitalism. But if we take a view here to the Netherlands and to Europe, we especially need to kick out the lobbyists of these big multinationals out of the European Parliament, because the influence of these companies in European politics is very big, especially in Brussels. Because here in Europe, we have one internal market. So we have 27 individual countries, but they share one internal market. So you can buy a product from Belgium, from Spain, from Portugal, without boundaries. So if you have a product on our market here, you can buy or sell it all over in these 27 countries. And Brussels is making the rules of what's acceptable, what's safe, and what can you buy, what can you sell on this internal market. So if we want to do something about this greenwashing, we need to go to Europe, the European Union, to Brussels, and to make better agreements there. But you see that these big multinationals, they buy their influence with their lobbyists, with their lawyers. There are thousands of them living in Brussels. All kinds of companies, not only the oil companies, but also the big tech companies and others who have their big benefits to be there. And we need to kick them out, and we make it more transparent that we know which politician is talking with who in that parliament and gets influenced by who. And that's also here in the Dutch politics. Last week we had national elections for the national parliament, and at this moment, and because still the government from before is still in office, we had a neoliberal government, and our prime minister Mark Rutte, he used to work for Unilever. He used to be an employee of Unilever. And he is a neoliberal, so he's only there for helping this kind of companies and not the working class. And if we want that everyone can join the fight against climate change, everyone should be able to join this. And now at this moment, you see with this government that the rich people, they are able to afford solar panels on their roofs. They are able to buy electric cars, to buy Teslas, because our government is paying subsidies for these electrical cars. But the working class people, the people who work in ordinary jobs in the factories, they cannot afford an electrical car. They are happy that they can buy maybe a third or fourth or fifth second-hand car for maybe 10 or 20 years old, which obviously demanding gas to bring them to their work. And the high educated people, they can use public transport and they can use the bicycle to go to the office. But the working class, the construction workers, they need a van with their tools. They cannot take the toolbox out in the public transport or on their bicycle. So you see that the working class people, they are not able to participate in this fighting climate change together. It's very individual. And what we see is that last week, with the last elections, the big winner of these elections, the party who became the biggest, is a far-right party who denies the fact that there is climate change. Not because of all these voters they deny, but they are very angry on our government that they see Shell and Unilever, they receive subsidies and pay no tax. They see the high educated and the people with the high incomes, they have these fancy electric cars and they get subsidy. While the working class people, they live in poor housing. And as I mentioned, it's very cold at this moment. And you need to heat up your house with natural gas, which is very expensive since the war in Ukraine, because we receive a lot of natural gas. We used to receive a lot of natural gas from Russia, which is all cut down. All the pipelines are blew up recently. So the prices of natural gas is very expensive. And these people, they don't have the money to invest in their housing, in insulation, or in other way of heating their house in a more in a cheaper, but also a better for the climate way. So people here, the working class, are very angry on this neoliberal politicians that they voted in a kind of a protest for this far-right politician, which denies that there is climate change, but also says the reason that you are not able to pay your bills is not because of capitalism, but it's because of migration. It's because of refugees. And that's quite a problem at this moment, because we get a big amount of refugees at this moment coming from Ukraine, of course, but also from Africa, people who flee from the results of climate change. So the biggest problem at this moment is how do we make the people aware of how do you say that we have different classes. That how do we make people aware that capitalism is the problem, that not migration is the problem, that not Islam is the problem, which is leader of the biggest party, Geert Wilders, says all the problem is because of Islamic peoples here in this country. How do we make them more aware of the economical system? And we have our hope and our trust in younger generations who start to see that there is this economy cannot grow and grow and grow again, because this older generations, they were also very depending on this system, because many people here in my city, they have a living of companies like Shell. They work here in the oil refinery. So we should try to let them join. That is, we are not here to close down the plant so you lose your job, but how can we get another economy where we can have also jobs, but also have higher income, so you can also pay your bills at this in this very strange situation where we're dealing with at this moment. So that's a bit of the Dutch and the European situation. I hope it's a bit understandable for you over there, but I'm really pleased to answer any questions if you have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Comrade Arnold. Just in time, very short and sharp and sweet. But stick around, don't go to sleep yet. And it's very dark and cold there, because we have a round of questions from the floor after this. All right. Check.
Okay, don't echo anymore. All right, thank you to Comrade. I'm not talking about making the world a better place by replacing an economic system instead of blaming it on the refugees and whatnot, and also very stark difference in irony when the government subsidize corporations and politics instead of claiming tax from them. All right, now go back to our country. We have a speaker here, Professor Darren Ong Chung Lee, is a chairperson of Party Socialist Malaysia's Renkiel branch. He's also the editor of thinkleft.net, PSM's English language blog. Professor Darren is a professor of mathematics at Xiamen University, Malaysia. He was formerly chair of Party Socialist Malaysia's Bureau of Environment and Climate Crises. As a chair, he engaged in environmental activism, being part of the Pertahankan HSKLU coalition that successfully opposed the efforts of the Selangor state government to DJZ, the Kuala Langat North Forest Reserve. All right, so Professor Darren, 20 minutes. I'll remind you when the time is running out. Explain us not in mathematical language, please. No, equilibrium game theory, please. All right, 3, 2, 1, go.
Very funny comment by because I actually used the climate crisis as an example in my equilibrium game theory class. So it's good that you know.
Go ahead.
I'm not going to do that. My class I actually do use it in my class. Right, I'm going to start with this question. How many of you remember when soft drinks used to come in those like glass bottles? Okay, half of you. I guess the rest of us are showing our age, huh? Yeah. When I was young, I loved those glass bottles. You know, like my parents would buy me toys. I don't need a toy. I just need this glass bottle. I would like blow the top. Like, yeah, you love to whistle. I guess you whistle. You make sounds of it. I was so fascinated as a kid, and I really miss those glass bottles because they went away. I think quite recently, after I had the chance to like play those glass bottles, they went away because all the soft drink companies replaced them with glass. The glass bottles replaced with plastic. And you know, this is a very famous example of greenwashing. I think a good example to show like the power and the insidiousness of greenwashing, right? So you replace glass with plastic. Plastic is a lot more harmful to the environment in terms of like pollution because glass is just like sand, right? It doesn't really cause any lasting harm. Plastic lasts forever. And when you see like littering and the pollution of like waterways, plastic is a big cause of the problem, right? And so the companies want to switch from glass to plastic because it's cheaper. Right? Packaging makes it a lot cheaper for them. But they also didn't want to get the blame when all this plastic stuff starts like polluting the rivers and like the drains. So what they do, you know, they funded campaigns like anti-littering campaigns and like recycling campaigns. What's the reason for that? Right? Well, when you see your drains, your rivers clogged out with plastic soft drink bottles, you don't blame the soft drink company. You blame your neighbor. Hey, this guy didn't recycle enough. That's his fault. Right? This guy didn't listen to the anti-littering campaign. That's his fault. Right? We start blaming the individual, and we didn't think, hey, maybe the reason that our drains are clogged, maybe the reason that like our rivers are polluted is because these companies switched from glass to plastic to save a few dollars. Very serious, right? It's very, very tricky. These capitalists are super smart. And you almost admire the like creative thinking behind all this, right? Yes, right? Like, and that's just something that we have to fight, right? As a socialist party, we have to be aware that these people are really clever. Okay, so this is, I think, a very classic example of what greenwashing is. So it's a strategy often used by corporations, businesses, and also like governments friendly to them, and to portray their decisions, their products as environmentally friendly, or to fund like environmentally friendly activities, so-called, right? And using misleading or exaggerated claims, the things that are not true or half-truths, right? And these are designed to like trick customers, to like distract consumers from measures that are harmful to business, but measures that could actually help the environment, right? This is a very common strategy, especially since the climate crisis has becoming deeper and deeper into the public consciousness. Companies know they have to address it. So rather than like making painful changes to their business model rather than making painful decisions that might affect their profit? Why not just like increase the marketing budget, and let them like do some greenwashing instead? It's a lot cheaper. Yeah? And the shareholders will be happy, right? That's the most important thing. So when we discuss this greenwashing, right, the first thing we have to all accept, right, is that this is the climate change crisis right now, right? This is an existential crisis, like existential as in like, if we handle this badly, like literally the human race might not exist. That's the worst case scenario. So this really is something that needs to be a top priority, right? And something that definitely should be a priority over increasing like corporate profits. This is something that we have to accept first. And I think we are at the stage where people realize that it exists, but maybe not so much the urgency. But we have to accept that urgency first, and that the consequences are going to be really harrowing. We're not sure how bad they're going to be, but it's going to be bad, right? It's just the extent of how bad it is. And the reason greenwashing is so dangerous is that we have this big problem coming up. If we know that it's super serious, that it might be the most serious problem that the human race has ever faced. And we have these companies funding greenwashing campaigns that are slowing down our progress in fighting this problem. They're distracting us from the real solutions, from the good solutions to the bad solutions, or even ones that are counterproductive, just so that they can make some short-term gains. So this is a very, very big problem, and a problem that is not just something that happens in Australia or the Netherlands. It's something that is a big problem here, right? Malaysia might be a small country, but we have a lot of like forests. We have a lot of like industries that are polluting. That there are a lot of things that we can do too, even as a small country. And there are companies in Malaysia that are distracting us from taking the measures that we have to take, right? And you see the branding, right? You see like advertisements, even like housing areas, or like products like words with like natural, green, and eco-friendly. You see like this very nice green trees, these like really cute animals, like maybe a panda, maybe like a kanjil, something like that, looking at you and saying you must buy this, or the kanjil will not be happy, right? So the marketing is very clever, but when you actually investigate, when you actually see what these companies are doing, right, like what they're actually doing doesn't match the marketing. So this is something that we see over and over and over again. Yeah, and I think packaging is one. I think it's a very famous example, but there are many more. And the consequences are really bad, right? For one thing, it's a distraction. So a lot of energy, a lot of funding, a lot of resources goes towards measures that don't really work or don't work, that are not really the main problem, right? A lot of people get disillusioned or get cynical, and they don't have the energy or the passion like to really fight for the real solutions. And this is really rough, right? It's not something that like can be easily fixed. So one big issue, right, is that in Malaysia, and I think the same is true for the other countries represented here, Australia, Netherlands, right? We have a country that's very, very pro-capitalist, right? Like the government really likes the idea of like having these big companies, they do what is right. But here's an issue, right? It's that, it's not that, I'm not going to say that all the CEOs are evil. I know the Socialist Party, I could get a clap by saying the CEOs are evil, right? All these corporate people are evil. That's not quite true, right? I mean, so I'm sure there are people in the top echelons of these companies who are good intentions. They really want to care about the environment. They really care about climate change. Sure, they might be there. I'm not going to judge people's intentions, right? But the point is that the structure of how corporations are governed, even if the people really want to do good, the structure doesn't allow it to, right? Because how do companies make decisions, right? Like if let's say you're a publicly traded company, you have your shares up in the stock exchange, right? If you're a CEO, you answer to the board. The board responsibility is only one, right? Is to increase the price of the share. That's it. That's the only responsibility. Like the CEO can talk like a good talk about like, oh, the environment is so important for a company. You want to meet all these ESG goals. They can say all these things, right? But the fact of the matter is, the CEO answers to the board, and the board's only responsibility is to increase share price. That's it, right? So you have to understand that the structure of how corporations work doesn't allow them to like to fight climate change, to like really make painful decisions that hurt their profits but help the environment. Even though they say so, they say, "Oh, we care so much about the environment. Look at this country in our advertising." Right? You cannot believe them because it's how it's structured. That's how the system is. It's not saying that this person is good or evil. It's just the system prevents them from taking the actions that are necessary to really fight this problem. And we have to realize that first. That's the first step to like understanding this climate change. So let me go through some other examples specific to our country, right? And this is something that's very local to me. I'm in Dengkil. Dengkil, if you don't know where it is where the airport is. It also includes like Cyberjaya, for example. And people in like Dengkil, Cyberjaya are very excited because we have like a new Tesla factory coming up, right? And we saw like, our Prime Minister was super happy to like be shaking hands with Elon Musk. Yeah. Well, Ilya actually lives in Cyberjaya itself. Right? Are you excited? No, not really. Okay. Yeah. I live a bit further away. She's actually there, right? So, yeah. But this is something that this is something that's a bit difficult, and this shows like why like greenwashing is a bit hard to fight, right? Because it's not that electric cars don't help carbon emissions. They do, right? Like, if you have like a normal like petrol car, yeah, it does produce more emissions than the electric car. You can't deny that, right? And yeah, this is something that the government can do. And the environment minister recently touted this as an accomplishment. Like, hey, we have a Tesla factory here. This means that this Madani government is like on the forefront of fighting climate change because we have this Tesla thing, right? And it's not. That isn't how it works. And why isn't it how it works? Because it's a bit of nuance. Even though it's true, like that electric cars have less emissions than like powered petrol cars, right? We have to look at, is it really the best solution? It's not just is it better than the worst solution, right? We look at what is the best solution. So what would be a better solution than like changing all these like petrol cars to electric? What if we could use public transport? We could reduce the number of cars. So I see here that we have our 2008 poster for our campaign bicycle Rayo Perubahan, right? Like changing our transport system to promote public transport, to promote bicycling, to make it easier for all that, to reduce the number of cars, right? Because yes, electric cars have less emissions than petrol cars. But what is even less emission? Like no car, right? So reducing the number of cars, it is like much better, much better for the environment than like switching from petrol to electric, right? So that is the best solution. That's what the government should be doing, finding ways to reduce the number of cars. But no way they'll do that. And why not? Because Anwar wants his photo shoot with Elon Musk. And not just the foreign car makers, right? Of course, the car makers here have a lot of power too, right? The petrol industry has lots of power here. And those people have lots of influence. So the best strategy to fight climate change is not the one that is friendly for profits. So that's really the big problem, right? And yeah, and that's the danger thing, because like the best lies are the ones that have a bit of truth in them, right? Like electric cars do have less emissions than petrol cars. That's the truth. That's the truth, right? So they use a lie, right, that is grounded in a small bit of truth, and that makes it like very hard to fight, because you have to understand the issue very well to recognize that lie. Like for example, if I were to tell you that, Arul went to the shopping mall and stole a hat, nobody would believe me, right? Why would Arul steal a hat? But if I told you that Arul went to the shopping mall to steal a vest, that might be true, right? Yeah. So that's one, and one example that like our comrade Sam gave, right, about the Australian natural gas thing, yeah, that his government is promoting natural gas as transition fuel. It's also a lie that's grounded in truth, right? That natural gas is less polluting than coal. That's a fact. But it's not the best solution for Australia and the world right now, right? So you have to be careful, aware of these lies grounded in truth. So all this, right, now that we're aware of this, what's the issue? What's the solution, right? We could say the usual things. We could say, okay, we need education, better education. Our kids need to be better educated about the nuances of climate change. Yeah, that's all good. Regulation must improve. Yeah, that's all good. But I think that goes away from the root of the problem. The root of the problem isn't so much that, right? It's really the fact that the people controlling the decisions of how to produce emissions, who are they? They are like the ruling class. They are the capitalists. They are like the billionaires. They are the people who control, who make these decisions of like what pollutes, whether to pollute or not. And they are also the people who are least affected by it, right? Because if you have tons of money, you can be insulated to some extent from the worst effects of climate change. So why are these people in charge of decisions, right? When they're the people that are least affected. So that's a problem, right? And really, the only way to fight climate change for real, to fight this greenwashing problem, is, okay, I'm going to like misinterpret a socialist tenet here, so sorry, right? We like to say that we like to seize the means of production, right? As socialists. Okay, so really what the production means is like the production of goods and services, right? But I think also we need to seize the means of carbon production. We do, right? We make sure the worker is the people making these decisions, right? The worker making decisions over like how companies make decisions, how to produce, because the workers are the ones affected by the climate crisis the most, right? The poor and the workers, they're the ones affected, so they should be making decisions. So all these things about like blaming individuals, recognize that as greenwashing, right? So the only solution is an eco-socialist solution. We fight climate change by making sure that the workers control the corporations, control the companies that are producing these emissions. Because the workers will do what is best for the common people, right? The billionaires will not. I think that's pretty common sense, right? So how do you fight climate change? Like we don't listen to the marketing, but instead organize. Strengthen your unions, strengthen your local socialist party branches, and fight, right? To make sure that the workers are the people deciding, do we make a decision A that increases profit, or do we make decision B that saves the planet? And I think we can be confident that the workers will make the right decision. Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade, for Mr. Darren. From talking about glass bottle and escalating quickly to recruiting more members into Socialist Party. Thank you. So I quite agree with the statement, and you say electrical vehicles lesser emissions, especially in emission case, because we use lesser energy when we don't give signals. All right. Now the time for sorry. Thank you. Now is the time for question and answer from the floor. Okay. So can I see some hands here? Whoever have any question, we go one round. We're going to accumulate all the questions and then let the speakers answer them. All right. I just been notified another directive from the upper ups that Comrade Sam has left the session to fight in the protest in this area. So good luck, Comrade Sam. And which means we only have two speakers left to answer your burning questions. Please introduce yourself a bit and then go to the question, and maybe you can address to which speaker you want to. Can I see the answer? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, maybe the comrade with the red shirt first.
Yeah, good afternoon. Philip Wong here again from PSM Subang branch. I initially wanted to direct this question at Comrade Sam, but I will still make some comments because there's a certain irony that Sam is from Western Australia, which is the headquarters for Linus Corporation, which has decided to export its radiation production. And no doubt they use the term rare earths, but I think for many of us here in Malaysia, it is not just rare earths, but radiation. They claim it is economically and environmentally safe. In fact, you shouldn't have used the word economically. It's environmentally safe. Then why have they exported the so-called production to Malaysia? So I think there's a double standard there. So that's just a comment, which unfortunately Sam is not here to address because it's more a question. Okay. The other question, and firstly, I think in Arul's defense, I think Saudara Darren has gone to some shopping mall to steal a tie for best dressed panelist. Okay. Anyway, this question is also about net emissions, because we look at everyone is touting how wonderful electric cars are. But I want to know what research has been done on the net carbon effect of electric vehicles. Because lithium mining is an extractive industry that has serious implications on the environment. They're chopping down trees. The production of lithium is another problem. And also, how do we get rid of lithium? And the other problem with electric vehicles is how do you charge them? You need more electricity. And where is that electricity coming from? It's coming from fossil fuels. So, what is the net effect of electrifying our cars? So, there are a lot of questions to be asked also about electricity, electric vehicles. So, public transport also theoretically can be bad, but probably less harmful because it's mass. That's the difference. So, yes, I would like to ride a bicycle, but I have a left leg problem. So, if someone can be my rider, that would solve my problems. So that's pretty much what I have to say.
Good afternoon. My name is Simon. I'm a cyclist. So my first recommendation is take up cycling. I think it might solve your knee problem. Hopefully. I'm not an expert, but that's what I believe in. Okay, first one is about carbon tax. I heard that Singapore has introduced a carbon tax, which to me sounds quite interesting, where they tax the polluters, and then in return, the money that is collected from the tax is used to fund so-called to decarbonize those industries. So it's one where the money is kept in one so-called like a trust account. So I want to ask Darren, will such a tax be good for Malaysia? Question number one. Number two is on just the recent things that have been circling online about, in my opinion, I think Go KL, which are running electric buses in the KL city, is a very good system. I appreciate the electric bus very much, in spite of I don't know where the energy comes from, but that would be the third question. We definitely, as pedestrians and cyclists, we benefit from the electric buses. You don't have all those fumes coming out. And because it's free and they don't pay, so the buses is very efficient. They don't spend time waiting for people to touch and go the cart, and the buses just stop and people get up and down very fast. But recently, there's a news going around that they want to charge foreigners who actually pay tax when they come into KL, either through the service tax, through the rent that they pay, or to the license that they pay to the mama store. So I think that's something that can we tell DBKL not to charge? Second question. And the third one is about why is our transition to renewable energy so slow? Thanks.
Yeah.
All right, so thank you for the presentation. That was quite good. So earlier I wanted to comment, not earlier, sorry. Earlier, Saudara mentioned that, yeah, so electric cars, they're going to use coal. And not only that, you need a lot of electricity and a lot of infrastructure. So I wanted to talk about another problem of electric vehicles, which is when you're talking about green energy, when you're talking about renewable energy, you're imagining it in the form of buying cars. buying different form of cars. You're imagining in building new forms of infrastructure. You're imagining building instead of Shell, maybe an electric version of Shell. What is the difference between this and the previous model of infrastructure, which spreads oil and gas? There is no difference. Fundamentally, you are shifting from one company or even the same company to own a new sort of production, a new sort of industry. So the same shareholders, the same owners can still own the new green companies. They can still set up the infrastructure. They can still be the owners of all these shell companies or whatever they may be. So I don't think there is much awareness among the people. But my question would be, is there a lot of awareness of this deeper issue where even if you do have a green transition, even if electric vehicles are perfect, even if they don't use coal at all, even if they can magically just have power, right? Who is going to build the infrastructure? It's definitely the companies. Because in this capitalist model, it is always the companies that have the largest access to build, largest access to research. And even when we are talking about researching, right? In the capitalist model, solar energy and other forms of renewable energy is hindered by the fact that you need large grants from big capitalist institutions to provide this sort of solutions, which means that the things that don't give them profit, even if it makes better solar energy, they will not fund it. And then my second question will be, are there any laws or upcoming laws to prevent this sort of monopoly of future energy or future renewable energy? Are there any monopoly laws for, let's say, what happens if a company that makes those batteries start to merge with a company that makes the metal, starts to merge with the company that makes the tires? Because these are very pressing issues that has happened to the oil and gas industry. And right now that has turned into one big monopoly. Thank you.
Hi there. So two general questions. One directed more to are not in Netherlands, and one to, I guess, some of our Malaysian counterparts. Even actually anyone who can pick this up to answer. So let me begin. So the first question is, when we talk about, say, public transport, or more specifically in the Netherlands, I'm aware that you guys have more of a biking culture. And if we're talking about the disabled population and the elderly, there is a special license for a special type of vehicle that allows them to drive or to use it on pedestrian walkways. So my question is, because when we're talking about public transport in general, right? Some of the people over here have raised that they're up there in age, and for some of them, it's going to be hard for them to move around, especially with mobility issues physically. So that's the physical aspect of things. But I come to think of things like the psychological aspect, like, for example, if they have dementia or have Alzheimer's, things like that. I'm worried that if we were to become a fully public transport oriented sort of society, we might have some troubles where the old have difficulty finding their way back home, or even have mobility issues getting from overcoming that last mile transport issue, which I think it's a very major issue when it comes to public transportation. There are solutions proposed like a personal rapid transit, electric personal mobility vehicles and things like that. But I just want to know from the Dutch perspective what it is like over there. So that's the first part. For the second part of my question, it's more about renewable energy generation. I'm sure in Malaysia, because of our land mass, so we have a few choices when it comes to renewables. We have hydropower, we have solar, we have wind. So when we talk about solar, there's this issue of acquisitioning land that is natural, or that it has natural reserves and things like that, and we'll be destroying trees and stuff. So that's basically what it means when we talk about solar. And if we were talk about hydro, there will be damming up places that might destroy heritage sites. Again, natural resources. And yeah, so that's the dilemma I have. So I was wondering if, person who is knowledgeable about mathematics, knows about the scale or the sort of calculation that we need to sort of make in terms of cost benefit and return on investment. So yeah, that's my two questions.
Okay. One more. Oh, okay. One more.
Both? Hi, I'm Sophia. So I wanted to ask, is it realistic to try reforms when the capitalist system, I feel, has such a strong hold on everything? And even with transportation, for example, KL has just been built to be very car-centric, and no matter how much public transport we build, it's not really seemingly helping, because somewhere where it should take me like an hour to drive to, it takes me 2 hours to reach through public transport. And like, why should I take public transport if that's the case, right? And like, so reforms like these, will they, I don't know, it just, to me, it seems like really frustrating, because no matter how much I volunteer and how much I try to like, yeah, change things, it doesn't seem to be going anywhere. So what other solutions could there possibly be? What other things can we talk about and think about? Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
All right.
One more question.
One more.
Sorry, from the organizer.
Okay.
Arnold can hear me also. Huh? Yeah, okay. See, as socialists, I think there's one issue that we sometimes overlook is the issue of consumption, because we looking at how we're looking at energy generation, renewable energy generation, to provide for the current consumption rate of society or humanity as a whole. But I know that with the increasing the capitalist system and even the increasing needs of the society itself, even though there's a lot of disparities, how some societies are using more and there are third world countries which need more but they don't get it. There are great disparities in this world. But yet, as humanity itself, there is a level on how much there's ever increasing consumption, and there's also a question where renewables can really replace that thing. And that is another thing that they will always come back and say, look, we told you earlier, renewables cannot really match the requirements, our needs. Thus, we have to go to maybe nuclear probably. We have to keep fossil fuel, because no way renewables are going to able to replace the current power generation using fossil fuels. So the issue about consumption. Now, how would socialists handle this? Are we telling society to consume less? But in a way, we can also do that, because the current economic system is a system which is unsustainable. We have a lot of products that we really do not need. We have a phone, but we still want iPhone 15. Any one of us, okay? That's because of the camera features for no reason. So this is a society of where things go obsolete very, very quickly compared to 50 years ago. So how do we address this whole question of consumption, while we also looked at how do we look at the renewable part of meeting the needs of society? Thank you.
One more question. One final one. Yeah. Two more. Two more, and then we can get the panelists to answer all these questions.
Hi. So I think within there's this narrative within the sustainability sphere that all these really big companies are trying to, I suppose, in their mission to calculate the emissions as the different scopes. They're trying to get their vendors or suppliers, which is basically in Malaysia, is basically your SMEs, because if I'm not mistaken, SMEs make up a bigger portion of. Sorry, the mic died. A bigger portion of our um of our economy, right? So what do you think of I suppose this practice of big companies telling, trying to get the SMEs to themselves adopt all these different ESG initiatives? Do you think it is another form of trying to get individuals to take more of the burden of their emissions, or is it another form of greenwashing, or maybe if you have different thoughts on the matter?
Hello again, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Hi, my name is Miro. Nice to meet all of you. Anyway, I got a very interesting question. I guess it's something that we all can ponder on when we go home. I think the rising consumption and the creation of more useless product that we don't need is also due to the rapid growth mentality, as well as, yeah, rapid growth goes to rapid, even technology advancement. Sometimes I think we're advancing forward for no reason. And then the demand goes on and on and on for much rapider growth. Is that even a word? Basically, you want growth that is much more rapid than before, even if before has been 3 years in advance. No, you want 100 years in advance. But we got 100 years in advance of consuming our planet, of course. So did you think that's one of the reasons why the increase of consumption? Because this happened in businesses as well, where the demand for increase of productivity. And sure, you can make humans be slave to productivity, but that means you consume the earth much faster than you plan to. So that's what I believe. So I think that the solution to this is also not just degrowth, but also being okay with stagnant growth. Because kind of think of it, a lot of argument would be like, then you'll be missing your PS5s and your WhatsApp. And I'll be like, I won't be missing something that I never had in the first place. So yeah, so it's degrowth and stagnant growth, one way to go. Think about it, guys. Thank you. PS5, not the solution, guys.
All right. So, okay. Yeah. Can we go to Comrade from Sarah from Australia, Socialist Lines, to answer the first question, and then from Rayana, and then you. Okay. In order to address.
Then there was a comment. What was the question?
Yeah, it's a question on Linus. We're not blaming you. Maybe it's from Australia. The question was, yeah, Linus Corporation from Australia spotting their pollution emission here in Malaysia. Is that correct? Right, yeah. So,
what's the question? Yeah. Yeah.
So the question is, they claim it's safe. Why is it claiming it's safe? Why is it being exported from Western Australia to Malaysia? You see, so
probably a question for Linus, isn't it? Maybe it's obviously not safe because otherwise we'd be depositing it in our backyard. So yeah. Yeah.
This company is claiming their country. That means they can do whatever they like.
Yeah.
Wherever they came from.
Yeah. I'm dirty on Linus too. That's why I almost got deported from Malaysia. But anyway, it's not the story.
All right. Okay. Comrade Anwar. Okay.
Comrade Anwar, perhaps you can answer all those questions and wrap your presentation. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. Thank you for the questions. Yes, maybe to start with the public transport infrastructure and the bicycling here in the Netherlands. Well, as the Netherlands, we're a very, very dense country, so we don't have very long distances from Europe in like 3 hours by car from the one to the other border of the country. So it's quite easy to reach every place you need, and almost every spot is built. We don't have any empty areas left here in this region. But that still makes that you cannot come everywhere with a bicycle, because it's, maybe, for example, the office where I work, it's like 90 kilometers from my house. Well, I'm not going to do that with a bicycle, because that will take me 1 day of bike riding. Will be very good for my health, but will not make me very efficient in my work. So if you want to invest in bicycling for an alternative for transportation, then you need to start to design cities in a way that everything that you need is reachable in 15 minutes. So schools, the supermarkets, the doctor, hospital, the dentist, but also your work. If you can organize a city that everything that you need, also sports clubs and everything in 15 minutes, then a bicycle can be a very good alternative for a car or transportation that's depending on petrol. And many of the Dutch cities are. So for everyday stuff, for getting groceries and stuff, you just can take your bicycle. And that's also because we are a very flat country. We don't have hills over here. That makes it a lot easier than in some other parts of the world. But also because of infrastructure. Because if you want to be able to travel and commute in a safe way, you need to invest in separated lanes for bicycles. So I've been in a lot of places all over the world where I would never step on a bicycle, but here in the Netherlands you don't need a helmet. It's totally safe, and cars have to wait for bicycles instead of the other way around. So it also asks for investments in by the local community. There was a question about how to cope with the older people, elderly people. Well, we see that there is an increase in the selling of the electrical bicycles. So especially people who are a little bit older, they all have like an electric bicycle, which also have their hazards, because it can be very strange situation when you as a young guy get overtaken by someone who is 80 years old on a bicycle who's going way faster because they have a battery in their bicycle, which can also be a little bit dangerous. So it needs some regulation on the top speed of these bicycles. But that makes that also people with bad health conditions on a higher age can still commute in the city with a bicycle because of these electric bicycles. But we here in this local community of Vlaardingen, we try to invest in that. We make public transport free for older people. People who are 65 years and up can have like free tickets for the bus. So they are able to stay in touch with other people and have social contacts with others, which makes it a bit safer than bicycles. And people who are coping with Alzheimer, they mostly live in nursing homes, residential care. So they get the healthcare, and if they go around, they go there with assistance and go with a taxi or with a bus. So they're not depending on the bicycle, because that might be quite dangerous. But still, there are a lot of people who are depending on their car, as I already told. People, construction workers, who cannot take their toolbox on their bicycle. Well, some do. In Amsterdam, they have this quite big bicycles where you can put all kinds of stuff in, because you're not able to go through Amsterdam with a car, especially for delivery. Package delivering also goes by bicycle, cargo bicycling. But a lot of people do have to travel like 90 kilometers for their work. And then here in the Netherlands, we do have very good infrastructure, but still the car is in some kinds of situations a better alternative, especially in the more rural areas. So in Amsterdam, the big cities, you can travel fine with public transport. But if you go to the north or to the south, in the rural areas, you're depending on cars. And there is public transport, but it's very, very poor. For an example, my office is like 90 kilometers from here. If I take the car, I'm there in 1 hour. If I go by public transport, it takes 2 hours for the same price. So public transport is they're not a very good alternative. And then when I go with my car, I can sit for an hour, and if I go by public transport, there's a quite big chance that I have to stand up the whole way for the same price. So the only reason is because of environmental reasons to go with public transport. And then is when the greenwashing of the electric cars is getting in. So all the jobs with the people with a high income, they have these Tesla cars because they think it's an alternative for the bad public transport. But instead, these electric cars, as you also mentioned over there, has a lot of negative things if you go look to the batteries, how they are made, but also that electricity here in the Netherlands is mainly depending on coal and gas production. That makes it we need to invest in public transport, of course, but we also need to invest in how do we design cities? How do we make it possible that you're not have to travel for like 100 kilometers every day? And in answer to another question is that unless that we also here in the Netherlands have poor people who are depending on poor healthcare, on poor housing, on bad, unhealthy food. Our country is still on the top of the capitalist pyramid globally seen. So here you can buy a T-shirt made in Bangladesh for the cost that's like here like three or €4. You only have to work like 30 minutes to buy a new T-shirt. So people buy stuff here in shops and they only wear it like 3 times and they throw it away. Well, that's not very environmental. So, and it's cheap because the labor in other countries is very cheap, and the circumstances are very bad. If you there are no T-shirts made here in the Netherlands because the regulations are too high. The safety regulations are much higher than in the southern Asian countries that you can never concurrate with those countries. And otherwise, there are people, they feel bad about that and they buy a T-shirt from like €100, where you have to work like 1 full day to afford this T-shirt. But it's not that if you buy a T-shirt that's like 20 times the price of a cheap T-shirt, that the labor is better or the income is better. But there is a bigger portion of the profit going to the shareholders. So that's also kind of greenwashing, that you think you're doing a better thing by buying something that's more expensive, but in fact you're just giving the shareholder a bigger profit. So I think we need how do you say trade agreements from European Union with other countries where we do not accept that stuff is made under worse circumstances that we would allow in our own country. That makes it possible to produce more local, because everything we buy here in the stores, in the non-food section, it's all from other parts of the world. It's all from mainly Asia, not only the iPhones, but everything, because it's too expensive to make it over here. And we can change that with good trade agreements, and that would mean that we have to pay a fair price for the products, or otherwise that will mean that the owners of these multinationals will have a lower profit from this trading. And for the last question about this, well, where will our electricity come from? Well, we do have a lot of solar power here. We do have a lot of windmills over here, but it's not enough to get enough electricity to get independent from natural gas and oil. So what's happening here is that for the last decades, the radical left parties and environmental movements were very against nuclear power. Here in the Netherlands, we only have 1 nuclear power plant. And every time when there was a debate, there were big demonstrations against it. But now you see that things are changing a bit since this problem of climate change. Also in the radical left movement, you see that people say, well, maybe we should not be against nuclear power anymore. Of course, we need a solution for the waste. Of course, we need a solution for safety issues. But maybe it's less worse than all the effects of natural gas and coal and oil have at this moment. So the debate is changing a bit in that way. So I hope I cleared up a bit for your questions for now.
All right, one quick comment on that. Now, comment Derek, go ahead.
Okay, you're going to have to remind me some of the questions because there were a lot of them that was a while ago. I guess I'll address the electric cars question first. The question is, do electric cars really, are they really better than the ICEs? And my understanding, I'm not an expert in this topic, my understanding is that if your energy mix is like mostly renewable, then for sure the electric cars are better than ICEs. You mentioned you have to take into account also all these problems about like the mining, for batteries. But you keep in mind that like petroleum extraction is also very polluting. Not just the burning petroleum, but also extracting is also very polluting. So if you have a renewable energy mix, an energy supply that's very renewable, then for sure, yeah, electric cars are better than ICE cars. However, that's not the case in Malaysia. In Malaysia, in fact, like a lot of our energy is coal. Like I think even 40%, 60%, oh, even worse than I thought, right? For some reason, we still have 60% coal, right? So it's not that like electric cars don't have savings. I think they do. Like even for like okay, so but the problem is that like if your priority really is to address climate change, isn't the 60% coal problem isn't that the bigger priority rather than like establishing electric cars? Right, so yeah, I think my understanding is that the mathematics shows that the electric cars are better, especially if like the energy mix is very renewable. But the problem is that we're focusing on the wrong thing, right? So the fact that it's 60% coal means that the savings to electric cars aren't that much anyway because we're burning coal to power our cars, right? And that is the lower hanging fruit. That's the problem that should be higher priority. Yeah, so that's a good point that you brought up. There's another question about carbon taxes, right?
Carbon tax recently introduced in Singapore.
Yeah.
Is it good or bad?
Yes. So when I was the head of the Environmental Bureau at PSM, we did support carbon tax, and my understanding is that like a lot of our allies in the environmental movements also support it, and the current head also told me that he still support it. Yeah. So that's a proposition now that we do support carbon taxes. Yeah, but it's not the only solution. Obviously, it's part of the solution, right? Of course, we have to punish the activities that do generate these carbon emissions, and a tax, is a good way to do it, depending on how we implement it, right? It also depends on the implementation. Right, another question?
It's again on the law, but it's like laws to control monopoly on oil and gas and energy.
Yeah. I have something about renewable energy smoke. Is that a question? Okay. Right, monopoly on okay. So that's a question that you asked, right, about monopoly, right? So yeah, that's true. So I think the larger issue is that like the worker doesn't have the control over electricity production, and that is true whether you're talking about oil and gas. That's true when you're talking about solar. So I'm going to make Hui mad at me by praising the coal industry, but there's one difference, right, with the coal industry and the other forms of energy is that coal requires lots of workers, right? So oil doesn't, solar and wind really don't, right? And that's something that actually helped the labor movement early on because coal miners were very powerful. Like in England, for example, right? Coal miners would shut down the country, right? That's why the government is very scared of them. And to be honest, a lot of the laws that we have in Malaysia right now, they are good for workers, because the Labour Party back in the UK was so powerful because of the coal miners, right? And you can see that they did a lot of good, right? You enjoy having a lot of leave, you enjoy having weekends. Yeah. Thank the coal miners in England, right? But okay, of course, we cannot go back to coal. I'm not saying that we go back to coal, right? I'm not saying doing that, but that's not right? Yeah, I'm not saying doing that, but I think I agree with your point, right? That it's not just about this condition. It's also you have to make sure that the workers have that same control over over the energy industry, like the coal miners did like that. Because if that happens, right, that's a lot of power to the workers. Like that's really the power to shut down the country, and that's something they can do. They have done a lot of good for, but it's hard because a lot of the renewable energy sources like solar and wind, they're like petroleum. They don't require lots of labor. So the balance between capitalists and labor is very skewed in that direction. So that's going to be a challenge, but I do agree that that's something that as the socialists we should try to figure out a way to address, right? That is not good if the capitalist corporations control the energy, whether renewable or whether it's oil and gas. But one thing that does help a little bit is that, like for solar especially, right? You don't need a solar power plant, right? You can have like individualized solar panels, right? But that does help a little bit. But I really think that the real solution is to strengthen the labor movements, like the unions. Like we have like labor unions as powerful as the coal labor unions were back then. You know, that would really resolve a lot of problems with environment and energy as well. So that's something that, yeah, I agree that it's a big problem, whether we're talking about renewable energy generation or petroleum generation.
And consumption, producing more and more.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the question. So that's something that's very important. And I think as we talked about, right, like there's a lot of this greenwashing involves telling people that, hey, you can spend like you did before, you can buy stuff that you did before, you don't have to be guilty because you recycle or because you're like in the right? So it helps. So a big part of greenwashing is making people feel good about still buying stuff. So we have to fight that, right? We have to make sure that that a big part of the solution to the climate crisis is simply to buy less, to use less, right? And that includes, like, for example, the cars, but rather than switching to electric cars, buying a new electric car, right? Use cars less, use public transport more, change the transport system so that less cars are used. Degrowth is something that we have to be a bit careful about, I feel, right? And I think I agree, like, we cannot just keep growing eternally, but the problem is that if you don't have redistribution, right? If the workers have no power when degrowth happens, right? Degrowth means that you're taking away money, taking away opportunity. Who do you think will suffer the most in the degrowth situation? It's the poor, it's the workers, right? So I'd be very wary. I agree that it's something that, it's something that has part. You can't just keep like growing like that, right? But it has to be in a situation where the workers have power. Because if you implement degrowth policy where the workers have no power, seriously, people will die. People will die. So we have to be careful about that, right? Like, it has to be a situation where we have degrowth, but degrowth means that the rich gets poorer. Degrowth cannot mean the poor get poorer. So that's, I think, very important when we talk about degrowth. But I do agree that's part of the thing we should discuss it.
Another one, a question on sustainability to calculate emissions as any corporations, and then will this bear the burden on individuals instead of corporations?
Yeah, so that's something that we have to understand, right? There's a big disparity, like, and that's something that's a big problem and a big irony when very often, like, the rich countries or the corporations like to blame poor people, like to blame like poor countries. I think actually for today's COP28, the Pope Francis actually made a statement about this, like the rich countries stop blaming the poor countries. So there are like many ways that happens, like for example, yeah, you can say that, like the poor countries very often have poorer regulatory frameworks, right? So they say, your palm oil things are regulated properly, that's why there's big problems. You blame the Malaysia for that rather than the rich countries. Or another situation is like, the reason that climate change is bad is because like this African country has high birth rates, right? So you sort of blame these poorer countries when, let's say, a person in a European country has like 10 times or 20 times more carbon emission than an African country. So one aspect of greenwashing is to recognize the disparity, right? That the rich countries definitely produce more emissions than poor countries on average. And the even greater disparity is that the rich people in the rich countries produce way more than the average person in the poor country, in the rich country. So we should not be fighting the poor people in like Netherlands should not be fighting the poor people in Malaysia, right? We should be fighting against the ruling class of all our countries. Yeah, but that's something that is important to keep in mind, right? Because we often pat ourselves like, I did that part by like cycling to work. Well, if one rich person uses a private jet, that cancels out like, I don't know, 10 years of recycling. Right? So it would be better to use that energy to like fight that wealth disparity, make sure that rich billionaire has less power, less access to private debt. So that's something that I think the chairperson wants to keep in mind, right? That when we understand the disparity, right, we understand that these individual things, I'm not saying that they don't help, they do help, but we learn to prioritize this like importance of controlling the means of the production, the importance of like reducing this wealth disparity.
Okay. I have two things to address here as the moderator. Number one is that I just received a directive from the higher ups. In defense of the Socialist Alliance of Australia, because we Asians, we say things. Talking about liners, Socialist Alliance in Australia has been supporting Malaysian communities to campaign against liners in Australia, including spreading message through their publication, The Green Lab, and through video production. When pressure groups say Malaysia stop liners camp out at liners shareholders meeting in Sydney, Socialist Alliance comrade Peter Boyle was there with them. That's number one. Number two is that I'm interested in the question of some of our comments here talking about public transportation, land acquisition, and also talking about how frustrating it is because we are very car-centric. We have the land, the size smaller than UK, but like the car similar to the United States of America. So here's that sounds very uphill battle, but here's another very uphill battle, but very crucial. Maybe what we can do to imagine, the thing is in Malaysia, one of the kind of people, politicians who has the most power, have the most say in planning our city and our district is the chief minister. Have to go back to the state. Each state, for example, from where I come from, Perak State, the chief minister, no matter how many public hearings, no matter how many protests, no matter how many meetings with technical agencies that would say like, we cannot do forest plantation here because, it's not good, wildlife conflict, and indigenous people are living here and so on. But if he wants to put a signature on it, he say, go ahead, and go ahead. Too much power. So maybe we could imagine the future, maybe we could mobilize to campaign to say, hey, let's have a special committee consists of representatives, delegates from the indigenous community, from the Orang Asli, from the NGOs, CSOs, people in the science background, academia, and whatnot, to counter and check balance when we say yes, go all for forest plantation because maybe we owe some money with some timber logging companies for the election campaign. Maybe that committee could say, no, hang on, hold on, let's have a public meeting, have a public hearing, and going to say no because this and that and so on. So maybe we can imagine that. So it's not only the people, the working class, taking over the means of production, carbon production, and also the means to have a say in the planning of our district, our city, of our country. Maybe you can imagine. Okay. One more thing. Last one.
One question that I answered. I think the question that she asked about like, what's the point, right? Like, it all feels very hopeless that you make all this effort and then like it doesn't seem like it does anything. So I think, yeah, that's something that's a big problem. That it does feel very hopeless at times. But no, I think we have to recognize, right, that the root of this isn't so much an environmental problem. It really is like a problem of like disparity between the rich and poor, the workers not having enough power. So if you just focus on like this particular policy, this particular thing, right, and you feel like, oh, I chose to take on transport, but it makes so little difference. I think it's hopeless if you think of it in individual terms. What can I do myself? Like you yourself can do very little. We together can do a lot. Right? So this notion of solidarity needs to be part of our environmental activism. Right? So don't be so proud of, oh, I didn't use a plastic straw today, oh, I cycled to work. Right? Those are things you do yourself, which is fine, right? But that's only a small part of what you can do. The big part of what you can do is in solidarity, in staying organized, like join a union, support your union, right? Join the branch of the Socialist Party. Like the things you can do together are way more powerful than the things you can do alone. This is the lesson that the labor movements, the socialist movements have taught us year after year, decade after decade, right? So the key to this, the solution to the feeling of hopelessness is to band together, solidarity is key.
So before we end our session, perhaps we have a few minutes more. Comrade Arnold, thank you for still being here with us. So any last words before we end the session?
Comrade Arnold, any last words?
I'm sorry. Oh, yes, of course. Well, it was very, very great to be with you there today. I hope maybe one day I can be come over physical and visit your country one day. I hope so. But for this moment, I hope we stay in touch and that we keep in mind that we as socialists and we as representatives of the working class have to work and act together on a global scale and know that we are not alone and that we are together all around the globe and we work and fight together against capitalism.
Right. Thank you so much, Comrade Arnold. Now, Professor Darren.
Okay, so I think that last thing I said should be not my last thing, but the key is solidarity, right? Like there's not much you can do alone. There's a great deal you can do together.
All right. That's the word, solidarity. Can band together and say, like, for example, if someone says, we need to charge these foreigners, if they do, they go get, no. That's solidarity. All right.